Hello, everyone. This is Richard Manning, President of Americans for Limited Government, here talking a little bit about. I think I'm going to try to hit on four things, about 5 minutes each today, so you can hold me accountable a little bit on the timing. One will be Inflation Reduction Act, which doesn't actually reduce inflation. The second will be Joe Manchin, Senator for West Virginia, who has endorsed the Inflation Reduction Act that doesn't reduce inflation, and what's up with Manchin, and what's up with Kristen Sinema, the other thorn in the side for Chuck Schumer passing things. We have Nancy Pelosi landing in Taiwan. I want to talk about that just briefly, and then a little self-defense case that made the news. In case you missed it, these are the type of cases that when they talk about the FBI statistics on gun usage, these kind of cases don't actually make it on the books. They're not the ones that people report on, and they happen all too frequently. So I wanted to also just show you that. So with that, let's just get started with the Inflation Reduction Act. As many of you may have followed, the Inflation Reduction Act is a piece of legislation that is essentially a mini Biden Build Back Better plan. It's going to spend about $750 billion approximately on green energy and various Green New Deal projects, pushing renewables and all those nice words they use for electric generation that doesn't actually work in 2022. Might work in 21-22, but it doesn't work in 2022 because we can't store the energy. So the left is pushing forward with it. Joe Manchin from West Virginia has given his signal of approval. They are trying to do it through the budget reconciliation process, which is, we've discussed in the past, but just as a reminder, what that means is that the Democrats can say, as long as they say it balances the budget, that's balanced, it's not spending any more money than it's supposedly going to bring in, then they can do it through something called budget reconciliation, which allows for 50 Democrats, 50 votes in the Senate, plus the vice president, to be able to pass something. And in doing so, they bypass the filibuster, and it allows for the majority party, if they've got the presidency and they've got the House of Representatives, the majority party to be able to pass policy things through using the appropriations process and the actual funding process for the United States. Recognize the loophole here is that it cannot. It can't increase spending or decrease spending. It has to be budget neutral. And so when they talk about these various programs for the Inflation Reduction Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, first of all, let's just get clear. Mark Zandi, who's with Moody's Analytics, who's one of the far left's favorite economists, because no matter what they do, he says it's great, managed to come up and say, well, it doesn't do much for inflation until year 10. Year 10, the last year of the projection, and suddenly inflation based on this is supposed to go down by 0.3%, 1/3 of 1%. Inflation is currently at 9.1%. If everything else remains stable, and let's hope it doesn't in terms of inflation going up, but if everything else remains stable and we were at 9.1% 9 years from now, according to Mark Zandi, his crystal ball says 10 years from now, in 2032, we would see inflation rate of 8.8%, all because of this bill. So, first of all, these economists predicting what's happening in the economy 10 years out, they are as reliable as the climate change people predicting what's going to happen in the weather 100 years out. They don't know. It's made up. You can make numbers do whatever you want them to do, all based on different assumptions. But so the absolute best prognostication that the White House can point to on this is Mark Zandi saying 0.3% cut in inflation in 10 years. What's more, it raises taxes on. I remember Joe Biden was one of those guys who went around saying, "Oh, I'm not going to raise tax on anybody who makes under $400,000 a year, unless you count when he raises taxes on people who make under $400,000 a year." This would actually increase the tax rate for people who make under $10,000 a year. So it does in fact increase taxes. The first $10,000 you make, taxes go up. The next 30,000 or so that you make, the taxes stay the same for the money you make in those sections. And then when you get about 50,000, taxes go up again for your 50,000th and $1 and to 60,000. Because remember, the way the tax system works is you pay taxes on your money that you earn in increments. So if you make $50,000, you pay taxes for the three increments that are between 0 and 50,000, and you pay at those rates. So the first 10,000, you pay at one rate. The next 20,000, 25,000, whatever it is, you pay at another rate, and so on. And so if you increase the rate that you're paying at in your first 10,000, if you only make $15,000, $20,000, you get an increase in taxes. And that is just the reality of what this bill does. It's not disputable. It's what it does. So does it create inflation? Does it solve inflation? No. Does it do anything about inflation? No. All the inflation reduction that they're assuming is assumed that they're going to be driving down energy costs by virtue of having driven energy costs up so high that they believe that if they put enough of your taxpayer money into so-called renewables, those renewables will replace existing energy costs, which they project to be higher. So essentially the idea here is we drive affordable energy to be more expensive so we can make unaffordable energy seem cheaper. That's the theory. That's what they're doing. That's what this is all about. And so like many of these things, when they give them a title, Inflation Reduction Act, they are in fact a gigantic lie. They're hanging their hat on prices on drugs and prescription drug prices, that certain things are going to lower prescription drug prices, and particularly with emphasis on Medicare. Will they lower prescription drug prices? Maybe. The challenge is the cost of lowering those prescription drug prices by essentially deferring to foreign markets, foreign governments, to determine what the drug prices are for the United States, which is the model they're using. The problem with that is simple. If you sit there and you artificially lower the price of medicine, for new medicines or old medicines, it doesn't matter. The people you're going to get a lot of old medicines available on the marketplace. You're not going to get new medicines available on the marketplace. You're not going to have new medicines being developed, because the new medicines that would be developed cost billions of dollars to develop. And if you can't get a profit off of developing those new medicines, then I don't know about you, but I want you to think about it. If you're investing in a company and your expectation is, I want to make a profit on that company because I'm trying to save for my retirement, let's say hypothetically, or save for college education. So let's say you invest in Apple and you say, okay, I want Apple to go up. I want them to pay a dividend. I want to get more money from my Apple investment, because I want to be able to increase my wealth sufficiently to be able to either retire or go on a trip, whatever it is, any reason that you want to do that. Well, suddenly the federal government says, well, Apple, we're going to send any new iPhone that you come up with. We think your iPhones are too expensive. And any new iPhone you come up with, we're only going to allow it to be, you can only charge what, about 70% of what you thought you would want to charge. Well, is Apple going to sell any more iPhones with that lower price? No, they're probably not going to, because it'll be the same price as a Samsung and everybody else. So you'll have the same price market for all the competitors. So they're not going to sell any more iPhones. What they're also not going to do is they're also not going to be able but they're going to take a 30% hit in their profits in terms of how much money they make. So while you might be on the iPhone 13 or iPhone 14, whatever we're on now, and you're sitting there saying, well, gee, I'm looking forward to the iPhone 14 because it's going to have speedier capacity, better ability to handle 5G, converging into 6G. So a lot of reasons why you might want to go forward. Problem is, the people who are making the chips for the 6G and 7G, they're sitting there, their incentive to make a chip for iPhone is dramatically lower because the price, iPhone's not going to be able to pay the price to pay for the new chips. And the old chips cost less and less as they become more and more obsolete. So what you'll end up with is an upgraded 5G chip with some modest differences in your lens quality and the like. But you're not going to end up with performance changes that matter, that actually increase your performance. And as a result, you're going to end up with a static phone, a phone that doesn't really become exponentially better over time. Instead, you'll end up with basically the same phone with marginal tinkering, and maybe the rose gold becomes rose green or something to make it so they appear to be new. But the fact of the matter is that the capacity of the phone won't have dramatically changed. In the drug world, we're really looking at quantum leaps in technology and changing different things. Results of 10, 15, 20 years of research, develop patents over that time, building those patents into medicines that can work, testing those medicines both over a course of years, and putting billions of, $1.8 billion on average into those tests, bringing those medicines to market, competing in the marketplace in the hope that your medicine does better than the ones that are on the market, or better for certain patients. And then you have a short time period when your medicine is under patent still, at which point, once it's off patent, it goes to generic, and the cost goes down by necessity because it's now allowed, anybody can make it. And so you now have your investment has to be made in that 8 to 10 year period when the actual drug is on patent and protected from being copied. Well, if you can't make your money back, do you want to invest in a company that can't make their money back when they invest billions of dollars into research, but they can't make their money back? I won't invest in those companies. It'd be stupid. I want to make a profit. I need to make a profit to be able to retire. I assume most of you do too. So the negative impact of this is to shareholders. The negative impact is to pensions. The negative impact is to anybody who depends upon companies, the market, the stock market, to be able to provide returns on investments. And so investment money will flow away from research on pharmaceuticals, because research and pharmaceuticals won't generate a profit. And the minute that occurs, you kill your research sector, and you kill your capacity to have the cure for Alzheimer's, the next great thing that comes out on blood pressure or any number of different ailments. So that's the challenge. And it's what the net effect is. So will this lower the price of drugs? It might, but what it will definitely do is it'll lower the cost, the availability of better medicines, of more innovative medicines, and that's dangerous, and it's wrong, and truthfully, it's anti-American. What if the president or any of these guys actually wanted to deal with price fairness around the world? What they do is they go and they file a lawsuit against the various countries around the world that artificially lower prices and force prices down to their constituents at the cost. So Americans are paying the freight for all the freight for the innovation, while places around the world are getting medicines at a lower rate. That would be a reasonable thing to do, to go after the countries that are artificially lowering the price with no regard to market. And if you did, if the U.S. government did that, they could in fact create a market where price equity really did occur, but it was based on market as opposed to based upon government edict. And that would be that would be something that would be desirable. There's a lot of other aspects to the irresponsible Inflation Act or whatever the heck it is, but I did want to show you the cartoon that Tony did, and it was one of my favorites. So I'll see if I can actually get something to come up here that would be interesting. Hold on, let's see here. We're playing around. Boom. Okay, I'll talk about Manchin in a second. I just need to get over to the. Come on, man. Okay, yeah, this is the Tony Bronco tune that he just did yesterday. We published it today. And the thing that we know is that with inflation, when the government starts spending money, they rarely, it's rarely the tip of the iceberg. They continue to spend money. So some of the things the government's spending money on is they're expanding Obamacare eligibility. That's not a one-time expenditure. That's a long-term expenditure that we get stuck with. So there's a lot of things like that in this spend that are, once you start subsidizing something, it's really hard to get it unsubsidized. Trying to get rid of wind production tax credits has been a disaster in terms of trying to, once they go into place, to encourage wind production, energy production. The people who are the beneficiaries of the production tax credits will always fight to keep the wind production tax credits. Always happens. And the people who are sitting there saying, wait a second, why are we subsidizing this? It's a philosophical argument rather than the people who are getting the wind production tax credits, for instance. It's a financial argument for them. So they've got more at stake. They're willing to invest money on lobbyists and others to keep their tax credits. And I'll just remind you on wind production tax credits, which I'm sure there's a lot more wind subsidy in the latest bill, that wind production tax credits, Warren Buffett is heavily invested in wind production tax credits. And when asked, he says, well, I wouldn't ever invest in wind energy. It's not profitable, except for the government tax credits, except for the government subsidy through tax credits to do so. So Warren Buffett invests in wind, not because of wind energy being a profitable or a smart investment. He invests in it because he wants the tax credits to offset profits he makes in other areas. And that's the interesting challenge. The people who are most benefiting from things like wind production tax credits are the very wealthy, who are essentially investing in wind, not because it's a good investment, but because it's a tax credit for their future. So that's the one of the things that we're looking at when we're looking at this bill is how, what's being subsidized, who are the real winners. And the question becomes, with Joe Manchin, Joe Manchin made a very, seemingly principled stand. He said, inflation's out of control. What are we going to do? We're not going to spend a whole bunch more money. And so what he did instead is, with this deal, is he went in and said, well, we're not going to spend, we're going to spend about $800 billion. And, that's okay. We'll spend $750, $800 billion. But we're going to do taxes, and we're going to tax people and tax corporations and tax the wealthy. We're going to tax, I've already told you how they're taxing the middle class and people who make almost nothing. But they're going to increase taxes to offset the this so-called investment in green energy. And so you've got this some things like a 15% corporate minimum tax if the corporation has revenues over $1 billion. Well, the assumptions are that, gee whiz, you can if you tax a corporation, that money just, it's nobody's hurt by that. It's just a corporate tax. Well, the truth is, if you tax a corporation, they're going, they've got to make their annual budget. They've got to make their, if they say I've got a guaranteed minimum tax of, let's say, hypothetically, $100 million. I've got to pay at least $100 million in taxes. Well, then they build that in, let's say 150, so it's 15% of a billion. So if I know I've got to spend 150 million in taxes, and the way corporate taxation is, you pay it on a quarterly basis, your estimated tax. So let's say you're paying 40, just for grins and giggles, $40 billion a quarter out of a $1 billion corporation. And so you're paying $40 billion a quarter. Well, you have to have that cash. You have to spend, put that money into the federal treasury as a deductible. So you don't have that money to spend on other things. You don't have that money to spend on employees. You don't have that money to spend on buying new equipment, expanding, your marketing plan to expand your marketplace. That money doesn't exist for all intents and purposes, because it's being taken out of your company, and it's being taken to a inefficient location that does your company no good. It's being taken by the federal government. So you end up with, at that point, what marketing campaign don't you do? What PR firm don't you hire? What employees, researchers and universities don't you fund research as part of? What do because you're cutting that money. That money doesn't just sit there and float around in somebody's pocket. That money's used for other things. So if you're taking the money and you're saying, okay, I'm just going to put it in the government through tax, and because we're going to have this alternative minimum tax that is significantly higher than what you currently would be paying, suddenly all the opportunity costs for that company go by the wayside. And the companies that can afford to offset it and just say, oh, well, I can afford to lose 15 billion, what do? Well, they're consumer companies, and they're the ones that say, well, I don't really like it, but my Apple, well, sorry guys, but the Apple just went from 1,000 to $1,150 for your new phone, and so the consumer then says, oh well, I've got the latest and greatest, but they just paid that tax through the increased cost of the phone. So that's one of the ways these things work. So there's lots of ways to manipulate the data and manipulate the tax system, but understand nothing's free. And so the federal government might be getting that and transferring, and it's just a sneaky way to transfer money from your pocket into their pocket so they can give the money to their contributors who are investing in green energy that doesn't work, isn't ready for prime time, is likely to cause you to suffer blackouts and brownouts as they impose more and more green energy standards and have less and less reliable energy of coal, natural gas, nuclear, and other fossil fuels. So that's what this is going to do. It's not going to increase inflation or stop inflation or reduce it. It's not going to do any of those things. It's merely a tax, a redistribution of wealth from you to the green corporate raiders who are always looking for a government subsidy for products that don't make sense on the marketplace. So, and why did Joe Manchin do that? Well, that's a great question. I think Joe Manchin did that because he got some side deals that were supposedly going to make it so some additional pipelines are approved. And maybe that will happen. I don't know. What I do know, he believes it will. But the Biden administration, the people in the Biden administration are living and dying based on trying to kill domestic energy and the distribution of domestic energy. So it's very difficult to come with a circumstance where they would actually move forward and allow for increased pipeline pipelines to be built. Once again, Manchin has what's called a side deal, which means we'll pass your legislation later. It can't be attached to this because it isn't a budget item, but we'll pass some legislation later that does what we talked about, what we agreed to. And, and then we'll see if AOC will allow that to go through the House, which we'll find out. So side deals are really tricky because they're not legally binding, and you do a deal, and the people who get what they want in the initial deal rarely remember that they were supposed to deliver something back in a subsequent deal. So anyway, that's what happened with Manchin. I wanted to talk briefly about the Pelosi in the Middle East or in Taiwan. And once again, I put some stuff about this yesterday. We talked a little bit and put a statement out on it. But I mean, Joe Biden didn't want her to go. Joe Biden tried to stop her. We had and she landed in Taiwan and with her delegation. And listen, nobody's a bigger critic than Nancy Pelosi than I am. Okay, you look at her Tony Tunes. We got a lot of Tony Tunes that are not kind to her in a lot of different ways. But it took some guts to do that. And it sent a statement to President Xi of China. And it was an important statement for him to hear and to receive. And so whether, you give credit where credit's due, and Nancy Pelosi, in my estimation, took a bold act. And I think it's a bold act of standing up to the Chinese. And my hope is that when we get back to, as we start legislating, Congress will be even more bold, will actually begin to take some bold acts to try to stop the Chinese, because so far, the things that they've been willing to do have been relatively tepid and meaningless, because the Democrats are beholden to the ESG funds, the environment, social governance funds, that are environmentally aware, environmental awareness. And unfortunately, environmental awareness in the United States means that you export your environmental risk overseas, particularly to China. And so a Chinese government that is building hundreds of coal-fired electricity generation plants, they're building with coal and with coal-fired plants, and the coal in China is high sulfur, which means it's the most polluting kind of coal, and yet they're building away on that because they want to get as much in place by 2030 as they can, so they can then do reduction by eliminating 5% of what they build and say, oh, look at how much we've reduced, when in fact they are dramatically increasing the carbon footprint that they have. If you believe that that's important, you have to be in favor of cracking down on China. If you believe that not having your products manufactured by slave labor is important, then you have to be in favor of cracking down on China. And Nancy Pelosi is 1 out of 2 on that. So that's a good thing, and hopefully that will create some consensus about how to handle China in the months and years ahead. There's one other thing I wanted to talk about before we get out of here, and this is more of a little kind of a thing that happened. And the reason I'm bringing it up, I think most of you are aware of this, or may have seen this. We don't often see instances when the press tells us about self-defense, and it's a self-defense uses of firearms. One of the things about our firearm statistics that the FBI collects is they don't collect self-defense information. They collect arrest data. They don't even collect conviction data. It's all arrest data, essentially, reported by your local governments. And so if there was no arrest, there was no report. So I'm going to show you this in case you haven't seen it. It's a pretty interesting little deal. Let's see here if I can get this to go. You'll see that this is a store. It's in Norco, California. There's the owner. Oops. He just fired at this guy who came in with a rifle. Owner's 80 years old. The guy, here's somebody who was coming in to the second guy who was going to come in. He jumps back in the car. The guy who was shot comes running around saying, he shot my arm off. One guy's outside. He almost gets left. And then they go tearing off. This thing was, I'm going to go back to the beginning because you see the guy come in with a rifle, right? And he comes in, he gets this guy, shoots him with a shotgun. And so let me tell you what you know about that, how the FBI would report that. The FBI would say there was an attempted robbery using a rifle. And there were four suspects arrested. Two suspects were a number of weapons, guns that were confiscated, and it would count as a gun crime. What it wouldn't count at is a self-defense usage of firearm, because the guy who owned the store was never charged and wouldn't have been charged because of self-protection. It was perfectly legitimate. And so what you end up with, and then from the public health perspective, the CDC would look at it and they would say, oh, we had this guy come in with a terrible arm injury for being shot by a shotgun at relatively close range. And as a result, this is a sobering statistic of how many of gun violence, because when the CDC does their health reports, they're taking hospital admissions. How many people are coming in shot? Okay, they're not coming in. They're not having anything about what the circumstances were of their being shot. So this would, on the CDC report, would appear as though there's some innocent guy came in shot, and the emergency room had to do something about it. And as a result, it ends up in a report by the CDC talking about gun violence. And on the FBI report, it would say people tried to commit theft using a rifle. And so you'd see that. But you never actually see what you just saw. And that is, once again, a guy coming in with a rifle, pointing it at the store clerk who's right here, right there. And then store clerk shooting at him. This guy immediately exits stage right, gets out of stage left, gets out of there. When you go back further along here, you then see keep going. Okay, so that's the end of the in-store thing. By the way, the store owner ended up having a heart attack, mild heart attack, was in the hospital, but he got out. So fortunately, he's okay. So this guy's going on to join his cohort. His cohort's running around saying, shot my arm off. And then they try to drive off without this guy, and he gets back in. These guys were picked up at the local hospital. 3 of them were arrested. The guy who was shot is in critical condition but stable, and so he will be arrested as soon as he is released. So that's what happened that was in Norco, California, and I wanted to show you that so you can understand how the FBI statistics and the CDC statistics on crime would handle this exact circumstance, and has absolutely nothing to do with what actually happened, which is some clown comes in with the intent of robbing a store, and two people had firearms that they were going to use to try to do that, rifles. They had an intent to do so. They were dressed as robbers would be. They came in. One of them came in first and met a gun owner, a guy who was intent on defending his property, a guy who was intent on defending his business and his livelihood and defending his life. And because when somebody comes into with a gun, you have to make an assumption that person intends to use it. Way back when I was a kid, I was working at 7-Eleven in the graveyard shift. It was Christmas time. It was December 27th. Back in the day, they used to put the soap decorations on the windows where they'd put happy holidays and season's greetings and pictures of Santa Claus and stuff, all done up in soap. And so it was really hard to see through the big plate glass window in front of the register. And it was about 2 a.m. in the morning. And I guess it was past beer. So it was after 2. And I'm standing there behind the register. 3 gentlemen come in. They're wearing long trench coats, and it was winter, but it was in Southern California. And Southern California people don't wear long trench coats. And so they kind of walked around, and one of them came up to the register and pulls a rifle out from underneath his coat and sticks it in my face and says, give me the money. And so, I dutifully step back, do what you're supposed to do, give them the money. They took me to the back, and they tied me up in the back with my hands behind my back. At the time, I was 19, 20 years old, and I was pretty physically fit. And so, but they tied me up. There's 3 of them, and they were basically stealing all the cigarettes. And so they were getting big bags full of cigarettes. And the guy who was standing there stealing the cigarettes, I moved, and he stuck the gun right here and said, "Don't move." And then he got my wallet. He looks in. I had like $1. I had $1 in my wallet. He said, "You're poorer than we are." And he throws my wallet, my dollar back at me, and and leaves. And so they leave. I call the police. One thing leads to another. We never arrest anybody. So there was, couldn't identify them. But it was a, relatively harrowing experience. Truth of the matter is, the expectation has to be, then the expectation, if you complied with what they're saying, they basically just wanted the money for drugs or whatever. The expectations change now. The expectation now has to be that if somebody comes at you pointing a gun at you, that they have the intention to pull the trigger. And that was by the way, it was a .22 rifle. It's nothing fancy. It was a blue steel rifle. I can remember it to this day. And blue steel barrel. And but it was one of those things where it was almost a business transaction, with the exception that I was tied up in my hands behind my back in the back room. It was somewhat harrowing. But this gentleman in this liquor store has these guys show up, and these guys they make no bones about it. They're not sneaking around. They walk in gun drawn. They have an intent to take whatever they want, and including this guy's life. And he said no. And, so I just want people to understand that individuals have the right to protect themselves, and people who, if they're going to come in to a circumstance with a gun, they have an intent to do harm. They have a willingness to do harm. There's an old Rand Institute study that showed that 1/3 of all homeowner break-ins where the intruder was armed resulted in harm to the homeowner. Meaning, if somebody came into your house armed, there was a 1 in 3 chance that you were going to end up getting shot or in some way harmed. And so that person who came in had an intent to use that weapon, an intent to use that firearm for bad purposes. And so you had a very simple choice to make. If you're at home and there's a break-in, you have an absolute responsibility to defend yourself, because you had to assume that, there's a 2/3 chance that, that you don't get physically harmed, but there's a 1 in 3 chance that you did. Now, this was an old study, and it's probably different now, but I certainly remember it, because we have a responsibility. We have you have an option. And I was fortunate in my little 7-Eleven encounter that I didn't end up finding, when that guy put the gun between my eyes, that I didn't end up not being here anymore. I was fortunate that I was blessed. But the fact of the matter is, this gentleman didn't take any chances. He defended himself. He defended his life. He defended his livelihood, as he had every right to. And that is happening more and more in this country. And at the same time, we have the House of Representatives, voting to ban semi-automatic rifles and some semi-automatic handguns in the process by a two-vote majority. Two Republicans voted with them. One of them is a guy named Tom Reed, who's retiring from New York. The other guys, and Fitzgerald, from Pennsylvania, not retiring. I'm going to tell you, folks, if you're in Pennsylvania, you might want to retire Fitzgerald, because if anybody's going to vote, he didn't vote the old days of I'm just voting to ban Saturday night specials. That isn't the truth anymore. They're now banning the guns that you use to hunt with, and they don't really care that you use them to hunt with. So these guys who are more than willing to vote for gun bans, Republicans, Democrats alike, there's no political party here. This is about your freedom. So so just know, when it comes to Americans for Unlimited Government, we're going to stand for freedom every single time. I'm going to read some questions here, and I've taken way longer than I anticipated I would. So you guys can make me get mad at me. Let's see here. It sure makes a lot of sense. There's always a dog. Yes, they do, Nancy. You are correct. It's a. I'm trying to find the. Let me just. There's some funny ones in here, but I'm gonna just. Biden said, "Pull my finger." That's pretty funny. It's pretty funny. It's a. It's maybe we'll do a cartoon of Biden saying, "Pull my finger," and then with Kamala cackling as Joe Manchin pulls his finger and then says, "What? You lied." One of the things that I think we need to really focus on, and Biden is destroying America. We have to remove the corrupt in office. Yeah, I agree with that. One of the things that I do, and I'm just gonna. This is not an election thing. This is just a personal preference thing. When I go in, I buy something. What I attempt to do is I look at the labels. When I'm out shopping for clothing for my wife or myself, I look at the labels, and I've gone up to stores I really like, and I gone up to store clerks and say, I can't find anything that's not made in China. And they'll go, oh, there must be something, and find like 3 things that are made in India. And, they're not what I'm not going to just buy it because it's not made in China. But, you make the store clerk aware that, I'm not making a purchase because everything here is made in China. I like some of it, but I'm not buying it because it's made in China. And I'm not supporting a repressive regime that's bent on destroying America. You tell that if a clerk hears that 2, 3, 4, 5 times, you know what that's going to translate upstream. And it may seem like a simple thing, but I engaged in this campaign with a company a retailer I really like in one of our local malls. And after 2 years, the third Christmas I engaged in this campaign, I was going around, and they had about half their goods weren't Chinese. They weren't made in China. Prior to that, the previous 2 years, 98% were made in China. I don't know if my little campaign had anything to do with it, but I know this. I was able to buy something from them because everything wasn't made in China. So my thinking is, if you don't let somebody know, if you don't sit there, if you just say, I'm just not going to buy anything, then that's good. But if you let somebody know and say, I was really disappointed that this was made in China, or one thing I've done before is I've brought something up, and I was going to buy it, and then I look at it and go, oh, this is made in China, I can't buy this, and I let them take it back to the shelf. Mean, but it makes the point that I'm a consumer who's making a business decision, a buying decision based upon where the origin of the product is. We obviously have to vote people in who are going to be tough on China, be pro freedom, and this is why getting some grief for praising Nancy Pelosi, but the truth of the matter is you have to offer praise where praise is due. And in this case, Nancy Pelosi deserves praise. And so I think it's, if we're going to be honest about how we're going to move forward, when somebody who you don't agree with on 99% of things does something you do agree with, you have to be honest. And so, yeah, we're going to praise Nancy Pelosi on it. So that's where we are. I'm going to just, with that, I'm going to just close out by thanking everybody. Please subscribe. And if you're on Facebook in particular, it's really cool. We're doing something that where we are dramatically expanding our Facebook presence. And we're up to around 171,000 followers on Facebook, 50,000 higher than we were just a couple months ago. And it's a pretty aggressive campaign we're running. It really matters if you're on Facebook and you see our stuff, go to Americans for Limited Government, check it out, click on us. If you don't already follow us, like us on Facebook. And if you do and you're seeing our stuff on Facebook, share it and just suggest others. When you share, if you like this, then you should follow Americans for Limited Government. Encourage them to like not just the content, but also the group. It's really important in terms of our overall strategy for getting as many people into the network as we can, because ultimately our capacity to leverage political power is how many people we're able to bring to the table. We don't have a lot of money to give to politicians. In fact, we don't give money to politicians, except on very rare occasions. But we do have as people. And so our goal is to be able to leverage the things we have and go from 103,000 people in our email list to 1 million people on our email list. And I believe we can do that in the next year and a half. But the way we're going to do it is through you. So I appreciate all you guys do, and we just appreciate your support. So thank you, and let's keep up the fight for freedom.